Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the Victorian Age takes place between 1832 and 1900. Quotes from the Times. Youth is a blunder, manhood a struggle, old age a regret. Benjamin Disraeli in Coningsby. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Lord Alfred Tennyson in Memoriam, and we will read that this week. So there's Tennyson. A man's grasp's reach should a man's excuse me, a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for? And that's Robert Browning and Andrea del Santo. So general info about the time. There's enormous changes occurring in political and social life in England and the rest of the world. The scientific and technical innovations of the Industrial Revolution, the emergence of modern nationalism, and the European colonization of much of Africa, the Middle East, and the Far East changed most of Europe. Far-reaching new ideas created the greatest outpouring of literary production the world has ever seen. So Queen Victoria, she was born in 1819 and lived until 1901, and I think that's a pretty long time for someone during that period. So there she is, isn't she lovely? She had the longest reign in British history, and the Victorian era is actually named after her. She became queen at age of 18. She was graceful and self-assured. She also had a gift for drawing and painting. Throughout her reign, she maintained a sense of dignity and decorum that restored the average person's high opinion of the monarchy after a series of horrible and ineffective leaders. In 1840, she married a German prince named Albert, who became not a king but a prince consort, so she's still the monarch. After he died in 1861, she sank back into a deep depression. Maybe not back into, she was pretty happy, but she sank into a deep depression and wore black every day for the rest of her life. So the growth of the British Empire. England grew to become the greatest nation on earth. They were the richest nation and they were the first industrialized nation. Their empire included Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Africa, Kenya, and India. So their empire covered about 1/4 of the Earth's surface at that time. They built a very large navy and a merchant fleet for trade and colonization. And they had an unchallenged military supremacy. So basically, England is the center of the world at this time. So they imported raw materials such as cotton and silk and exported finished goods to countries around the world. By the mid-1800s, England was the largest exporter and importer of goods in the world. It was the primary manufacturer of goods and the wealthiest country as well. Because of England's success, they felt it was their duty to bring English values, laws, customs, and religion to the savage races around the world. So kind of what we experienced in America, the white man's duty. So this is also when the Industrial Revolution is taking place. Factory systems emerged. The shift in the English economy moved away from agriculture toward the production of manufactured goods. In the Great Exhibition of 1851, Prince Albert housed in the Crystal Palace, which wasn't made of crystal but of glass and iron, exhibited hydraulic presses, locomotives, machine tools, power looms, power reapers, and steamboat engines. So, they still have a brutal factory condition, low wages, crowded cities, but 1830s marks the beginning of the political and social reform acts. So there's a shift from the agrarian society to industrial society, creating a middle class. But despite wealth, millions are still suffering from poverty and dangerous working conditions. Whoops. In 1832, the first Reform Act extended the vote to most middle-class men. And in 1833, Britain abolished slavery, and the Factory Act regulated child labor in factories. In 1834, Poor Law Amendment applied a system of workhouses for poor people. In 1871, a trade union act made it legal for laborers to organize to protect their rights. So the religious movement in Victorian England. So there's an evangelical movement. Let me just pronounce that one more time. Wow, I can't even pronounce it. An evangelical movement. You know what? You guys know that I just can't pronounce this word for some reason. So the evangelical movement emphasized a Protestant faith in personal salvation through Christ. This movement swept through England and led to the creation of the Salvation Army and the YMCA. So the Oxford movement, the Tractarians, sought to bring the official English Anglican Church closer in rituals and beliefs to Roman Catholicism. So John Stuart Mill, he was a philosopher who had two main ideas. Utilitarianism, the object of moral action was to bring about the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. In liberalism, governments had the right to restrict the actions of individuals only when those actions harmed others, and that society should use its collective resources to provide for the basic welfare of others, and it also encouraged equal rights for women. Charles Lyell. He showed that geological features on Earth had developed continuously and slowly over immense periods of time. And Charles Darwin introduced the survival of the fittest theory, which will come into play for social Darwinism. And there's Darwin. So Adam Smith, we know him as the creator of capitalism. So he's an 18th century economist, and he held that the best government economic policy was to leave the market alone, to follow a laissez-faire or let it be policy of little or no government intervention. I always think of laissez-faire as hands off. So Herbert Spencer applied Darwinism to human society. As in nature, survival properly belongs to the fittest, those most able to survive. Social Darwinism was used by many Victorians to justify social inequalities based on race, social or economic class, or gender. Victorian literature. So there's 4 types of writing that were popular during the Victorian period. Realist, naturalist, the novel, and poetry. Realism. This is also a pretty popular period for realist art as well. They moved away from painting these kind of abstract, maybe not abstract, but these really beautiful pictures of nature to painting people in working conditions or painting how things really seem and look. So it kind of reminds me if you were to go to a still life class and paint a picture and some fruit. So it's the attempt to produce in art and literature an accurate portrayal of reality. So realistic, detailed descriptions of everyday life and of its darker aspects appealed to many readers disillusioned by the progress growing on around them. Themes in realist writing included families, religion, and social reform. Naturalism, based on the philosophical theory that actions and events are the results not of human intentions, but of largely uncontrollable external forces. Authors chose subjects and themes common to the lower and middle classes. Attentive to details, striving for accuracy and authenticity in their descriptions. The novel. If we had more time, we would probably read a Victorian novel, but because this is such a short amount of time to teach 3 periods of literature, we probably are just going to stick, actually, we definitely are just going to stick to poetry and shorter short stories. So Charles Dickens becomes pretty much the most popular Victorian novelist. Many of his novels were published in serial form. His comic and sentimental descriptions of the lives of people in diverse occupations and social classes made Dickens the most popular Victorian novelist. So these are all stories that we still read today. Poetry. So, Lord Alfred Tennyson was the most popular Victorian poet. He wrote narrative poems, and we're going to read some of them. Robert Browning, he raised the dramatic monologue, which we will talk more about, and he made it a vehicle for deep psychological probing and character study. And then Elizabeth Barrett Browning, with Robert, was one of the literature's greatest love affairs. She wrote love sonnets valued for their lyric beauty. Isn't she beautiful? So here's some more interesting facts. In 1848, women began attending the University of London. In 1850, life insurance is introduced. In 1851, gold is discovered. So it's a pretty exciting time. In 1860, Florence Nightingale found school for nurses. In 1876, the telephone is patented. Thomas Edison patents the phonograph in 1877. In 1886, Wimbledon opens and tennis fans everywhere just go crazy. In 1888, Jack the Ripper stalks London's East End. In 1901, Queen Victoria dies. So let's see, I have the syllabus open, and we will look at what we're going to read. So we're going to read Lord Alfred Tennyson's In Memoriam. We're going to read an excerpt from Agnosticism and Christianity, Dover Beach, The Scholar Gypsy, and the Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister.